Good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thanks so much for joining us for the March user group. So today, based on information we got from those who attended last month, we're looking at forms. So today's session is very much around the essentials for forms, and even if you've been using forms for quite some time, hopefully we've got a few things we can share and pass on. What we'd like to do moving forward is provide you with a welcome to country. And so Marketing Cube acknowledges the Gadigal of the Eora Nation as the traditional custodians of the land on which we operate. So we pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. And we extend a special welcome to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who may be online with us today. So thank you. Thanks for joining us. So what's our agenda? What's the plan for the next 45 minutes? So as is normally the case, we're going to kick off with any submitted questions and try to provide an answer to those questions. Then we're going to look at the mechanics of the Eloqua form design editor and what that looks like, and just give you maybe a few tips on navigation and working with that. From there, we'll look at some practical use cases for forms and different campaigns that you might be operating. And also looking at some ideas around optimal form performance and how a data strategy certainly plays a key role in that particular exercise. And then finally, release 24A. Most of you, or all of you, will be on 24A, so we'll just do a recap on some of those, and of course Q&A. So as we've said before, Q&A is the same always, so please feel free to answer or ask questions throughout the course of the session. So we had one question submitted, and this is a great question from Jared, and I think Jared's actually on the line with us today, and he asked a question that probably is the most standard question, I think, and the most popular question in relation to forms, and that is, how many fields is too many fields on a form? And so after putting some thought and thinking into that, I came up with great question as your answer, Jared. But okay, so how many is too many? Well, look, there's all sorts of research, and Eloqua has done this over the years, provided information. I think from memory, the magic threshold was around 7 is your optimal number. Once you start getting more than 7, you start to get more drop-offs, or form abandonment is the term we like to use. But when you do some Googling on this one, which I've done, you get a lot of B2C type of responses. And so the B2C world is obviously a little bit different to the majority of people who are using Eloqua and who would be on the call today. And so that research is a little bit harder. So that's why I kind of go back to the Eloqua research, because that was based on data of Eloqua clients globally. Now, that data is a little old, but I think it's probably still quite relevant from that point of view. So 7 seems to be the magical number that you don't want to exceed necessarily. I'm going to provide you with some tips as we move through the session today, though, on how you can potentially reduce the questions. And there are certain tricks that we can play around with forms to only ask questions that we actually really need the answer to. And so some of that includes a little bit of discipline as Eloqua users to just not throw every question under the sun onto a form when they're just really not necessary. And there are some other tricks that we can work along the way. So bear with me, Jared, and hopefully by the time we get to the end of the session today, you might have a better understanding of my response to that particular question. All right, so let's jump in and look at the form design editor. And I've called it mechanics because I'm really wanting to focus on the navigation of the form itself and how you build the form and what you do with the form and how you get it to function and so on and so forth. So let's do that first. All right. So Eloqua is a pretty broad-ranging tool, and it does have a lot of different functions. And those functions are on the screen right now, and you'd be very familiar with all of these, or potentially the vast majority of these. But of course, our focus today is really primarily just on forms. And it's at this point, something that I'd never thought about. I was actually at a conference and had this conversation with someone who was new to Eloqua. And they had come from a Google environment where they were using Google Forms to present different things to people. Great tool, really quick to put together, etc. And then the difference for them that they couldn't quite get in their head was that the Eloqua form and an Eloqua landing page are two completely separate constructs. They don't require each other to function. They can work together, but they don't require each other in order to function. The Google example, when you create a Google form, for example, Google already has the form sitting on a landing page. They're not separate entities. They simply are one in the same. And so from that point of view, it wasn't until we went through a bit of a conversation, they're like, okay, finally, I get it. I understand. So first point to understand in relation to Eloqua forms is that they are a separate entity. They're their own construct within the platform. They can be used with Eloqua landing pages, but they can also be used for a whole range of other things as well. So let's look at the form itself and understand how it functions. And primarily, it has two pieces. There's the design portion of the form, which I've kind of always disputed the language of design, because design implies that you potentially make, add colors and change fonts and do all that sort of fun stuff, which you don't do here in the design portion. So the design portion of the Eloqua form is all about designing the fields and how the fields are going to function. Are they a single select pick list? Are they a free text field? Is it a paragraph field? Are they radio buttons? Is it a multi-select pick list? That's the design that we talk about when we talk about the Eloqua form and the design piece. The other side of your form is the processing steps. And so the processing steps is really the power of the form. And this is where you can control what happens to your data as soon as somebody hits submit. And if you've spent a little bit of time in forms, you'll know there are loads of processing steps. And not only are there loads of processing steps, but then you can place conditions on some and you can turn some off and you can have some that are always on, for example. So there's a whole range of things that you can do in relation to where the data goes. At its most basic level, though, let's pretend, for example, that you kind of miss one of the most important processing steps, which is to create a contact or update a contact when the form is submitted. If you fail to do that, you don't lose the data. The data is always sitting in your form. And that's an important point to understand. So every single form submission remains in your form. And that includes testing data as well. So I'll talk to you a little bit later here about how we can get rid of that testing data, which obviously will in turn make your insight reports a little bit easier and more effective to understand and more accurate. It is probably the key point. So first thing, your form has two parts. Those two parts are, one is design, where we build out the actual fields that will be on our form. And then the processing steps. What do we do with all of the data that we capture in the form as soon as the person hits submit? And so that's our processing steps. Okay, what do you need to know? So I tried to bullet point some key things that I thought you really need to understand, or at least know about forms before you kind of go too much further. First one, email address. Actually, did you know that email address is the only field that you have to have on a form? You can have a form with simply email address as its only field if you really want to. You can do that. But it is the one that is absolutely required on any particular form. And that's because Eloqua needs to associate the submitted data to a particular contact within the platform. Number two, so one of the key reasons people like to use Eloqua forms on Eloqua landing pages is because of the ability for that form to pre-populate. And you may have noticed when you're building out some forms, some fields, when you drop them in, will automatically change to yellow. And so that yellow, just like when you see that same yellow in an email or on a landing page, is in fact a field merge. And so what's happening there is Eloqua is ensuring that when the person clicks on the email and reaches your Eloqua landing page with the Eloqua form sitting on it, that much of the form, hopefully, will actually pre-populate. This does a few things. One, it helps ensure accuracy, certainly of an email address, which is good. Then the second benefit to that is also it speeds up the process. So this ties a little bit into your question, Jared, about how many fields is too many. Too many fields are when we have too many fields that we have to manually enter data into. But if when a person reaches a particular form and the vast majority of the form is actually already populated, then hopefully it makes it much easier for them to complete, and we therefore reduce form abandonment is one of the key things. Pre-population of field merges. Three, the design editor is basically broken down into three pieces. There's the contact fields that you can access. There's all of the form elements. And then finally, field groups. And field groups are really just designed to be a little bit of a shortcut for you and to enable you to play around a little bit from a design point of view. Maybe you want to put in 2 columns or 3 columns, things like that into a form. So that's where you would design that here in the design portion. All of those areas, so contact fields, every single contact field that you have. So keeping in mind, not account fields. Okay, so contact fields is what we're adding to a form. The form elements, so progressive profiling is a really popular one. Form text enables you to put little subheadings above certain sections. So if the form potentially asks for first name, last name, email address, you might want to put a heading above that called your details or about you. And then underneath that, you might ask for geographical questions. And so maybe a little heading is, where in the world are you? Type of exercise. And we give them the ability to answer city or country or wherever they may be, that sort of stuff. So that's what form text is all about. Then you've got your single line text, paragraph text, and all of the usual suspects that you would expect. Something you've got to think about when you're capturing information like this, especially if you drag in a form element, which would typically mean you're adding a custom field of some sort to your form, then you need to think about where that data is going to go. So if what you're presenting people is a paragraph text and giving them a chance to really be quite verbose and say lots of things, then you need to think about where that data is going to go. And if it's going to go to a place that is in fact a single line text, or is it also a paragraph text? So you kind of want to think those things through. This is also where you might ask obscure questions that probably don't have life beyond the form. So if you're getting people to register for an event, perhaps, and in the context of that event, maybe they get a free red, blue, or green t-shirt. Okay. So you don't need to store their preference anywhere else. It really just probably needs to be in the form itself. And so what you can do is grab maybe it's a single select pick list, create yourself a pick list with the red, what did I say? Red, blue, green, whatever I said, those colors, and drop those in. And same thing, you may then want to also ask for t-shirt size. So again, you might create a single select pick list and grab that information. And again, we probably don't need to move that information off to a custom object or to the contact. Not necessary. It's really campaign specific. It's really just for one event. Therefore, that information can probably just live in the form itself and not actually be sent anywhere beyond that. And of course, you can access that through your exporting function as well. Okay, what else do you need to know? So if you have an event where people can choose to register from one event or for one event from a list of e.g. 10 or more, you actually only need one form. And this is one thing I see fairly new users make the mistake the first time. They generally don't make it a second time. So if I think of our financial services clients or even our higher education university clients, whether you have an event that's happening in multiple cities or potentially an event that's happening across multiple campuses, you don't need to have an individual form for each location. You can, in fact, just have one form to take care of that for you. And then what we do is in processing steps, based on which location people might choose they want to register for, we take that information and we can then personalize what happens in the processing step. So if somebody's registering for Sydney, they receive a confirmation email with all of the details about how to get to the Sydney venue. Maybe it's Google Maps, things like that. So we can use the conditional step at the back end of your form to control that. Now, you cannot apply an Eloqua email signature to an email sent using the form processing step. So this is kind of a heads up more than anything else. So the ability to apply an email signature, which you see, for instance, in most of the email communications you get from us around the user group, we use the campaign canvas to send those. And that would make sense because you've got the signature function available on the campaign canvas to drive that, etc. However, occasionally people will want to use that same functionality following a form submission. I'd encourage you to think that one through because you don't want to overdo it because the last thing you want is for people to become so familiar with emails coming in from salesperson, Jenny Smith, that every time they see Jenny Smith in their inbox, they kind of, whatever, it's just another marketing email. And then they, miss an actual email from Jenny that, she sent herself. Think that one through and how you want to do it. But if you do want to do it, the way you would do it is instead of using the form to send the submitter an email, you would actually send the person to a campaign canvas and use a campaign canvas to send the confirmation email. And that's where you can apply the email signature. So if you've got any questions on that one, just let us know. Okay, based on a person's response to a question, you can do a lot of things and you can control how the data is managed using the form processing conditionally function. And this ties in a little bit to point number 4 that I talked about. There can be a whole range of questions that you will pose to people, and then it's set based on their response. You may, in fact, want to provide a slightly different autoresponder or an email, or even adjust the landing page with different information at the same time. So conditionally is the function that you'll see, and I'll show you here in a minute how you do that and how it works. And certainly a key point that I can't repeat enough is form templates. If you find that you're going to a form that was used 3 or 4 months ago, pretty much the same thing, let's just do a save as. There's a lot of complexity in a form, and a form can be highly personalized and can be very specific to a campaign. And so if you then start to go through and have to make changes to all those different things, first of all, you need to make sure you absolutely update the form so it is absolutely correct in context of what you need. But as you start to delete and remove and add different things, it's highly likely that you'll receive an error message from Eloqua. And those error messages can be pretty painful because you've got to try and figure out what it's telling you and then in order to fix it. And you can't save it until you fix those errors. Often I find the troubleshooting that's needed to go through the process of trying to fix the errors is just an utter waste of time. If you were using templates, you had probably already had built the form and you would be already on your way doing other things. So think about form templates. What else do you need to know? So your form submission data, which you access from the actions menu, it contains every single form submission, and it's not unique. And it's good that it's not unique because we want to make sure we capture every single submission. Think about that one. Now, if you wanted to delete testing data, you can absolutely do that. And I'll show you how to do that here in just a few moments. And point number 10, because I don't think I can say it often enough, again, is form templates. Okay, so think hard about form templates. If you need a hand with any of those, just let us know. It's not rocket science, and there are ways that you can go about building out your form template. And doing a save as of an old form and trying to turn that into a template is not the easiest way to do it. The smartest way to do it is just to start from scratch. If you're replicating a form that you've kind of already got, then you might be looking at 10 or 15 minutes, but it's not that hard and does make it a lot easier, certainly for new users who are coming on board into the business. So any questions on any of those points before we dive into the actual platform and have a look at some forms? All right, okay, so I've got a range of different landing pages here, which I'll show you shortly because they've got different forms on them. But what I wanted to do is show you how I would create a form, say, for the user group. Now, the user group is, it's morphed over the years, and the form, and this is, I think, a fairly natural process. Forms will morph and grow over time. And so with that being the case, I'm often going back and updating my different templates. Okay, so you can see this is pretty much done. The only things that I really do here that are different on a month-to-month basis is to update my select pick list. So I would come in here and then create the relevant pick list, which is to display the dates that you see. And you'll see we've got a couple of columns here. So I'll show you how to do that because it can be a little bit tricky. And then there's a whole bunch of hidden fields down the bottom here. And so you can see I've configured these, and this is what I mean by not doing a save as of an existing form. So you can see here I've got calls, not really calls to action, but they're heads up for me. So I need to add the date, I need to add the topic. But otherwise, I get absolute consistency in the way that data is represented within the platform as well. And some information goes off to a CDO, some of it stays on the contact. Here, what I've got is a list of different activities that can be performed. And so again, to ensure absolute continuity in those, I've preloaded all of them in. Therefore, I only need to delete the ones that I don't want in this particular form. And that way, from a reporting point of view, it's much neater and much tidier, and there's much more consistency. So when your consistency is the key, the more consistent your data is, the better your reporting will be. And then these are all field merges that you can see sitting below here. And then also for the punter filling in the form, that is you, most of them are also the same. So progressive profiling, in this instance, we just select one out of that possible list of questions. We don't randomize them. We've kind of got them in a priority listing that is important to us that we want to capture. But one thing I wanted to show you was around the 2 and 3 column exercises. So if we drag in 1 or 2 columns, for instance, these are custom fields. Okay, so a custom field is whatever you kind of want it to be. But you can see what I've done here is I've actually got first name and last name. So the easiest way to do that is to go ahead and delete one of them. And I'll just, let's say, grab address. I'm going to drop that in. Delete the other one. And then drop in that like so. So I don't have a field. We don't really use address field number 3. So hence there's no automated field merge for that one. But you can play around with those and you can move them as well. So just like you would within the email design editor and the landing page design editor, you've got that same sort of concept of being able to move things around should you want to. And if you don't want them there at all, of course, you can delete them. Now, some of the fundamentals around using the form is required fields. And so remember I said email address is actually the only required field that you must use. And so over here on the left-hand side, we can see all of the relevant pieces that we need. We can see in this case, field merge has already been selected automatically by the platform. And this is where I make it required. So this field is required. If I untick it, we lose the little red highlight there. So we'll change that back. Now, this one, so must contain a valid email. So what is that actually doing? It's validating that the format of the email address is correct. So it's not Derek_Bell space at blah, blah, blah. It's actually Derek_Bell at with no spaces. It has a domain attached, etc. So the format of the email is correct. Now you can change these error messages, by the way, if you want to make it a bit casual. But maybe something like, try that again or something like that. And then you've got these other options here. So must contain a valid number of characters. Probably not a good idea for email address, but could be helpful for mobile phone numbers. If you're only dealing with domestic onshore mobile phone numbers, for instance, that could be helpful. These ones here, which I've not selected, which I probably should select, keeping in mind this is a template, are good to help with stopping bots and spammers and those sorts of things, more bots probably than anything else, trying to ram information into your forms, etc. So that's what they're for. And then there's really no reason why you shouldn't tick those boxes, but it is up to you to do. But if you save it as a template and as an organization, you think that's a good idea to always have those selected, better, remember, it's much easier to remember to turn something off than it is to always remember to turn it on, then maybe you incorporate that into your template. Then the other options you've got down the bottom here, so you've got 3 column, etc. Basic contact, the reason these ones are grayed out is because I've already got elements of those fields sitting in here. So if you started with a brand new fresh form, then these would not be grayed out and they would be available for you to drop in place. Then when we move to the middle, this is basically just looking at the design of where you want to put things. So here you've got label position now moved to the left, so you can see it's moved everything around. You can see it doesn't work quite well, though, when you've got 2 columns. So, think that one through. Label alignment can be to the left or to the right. So there's some basic things that you can do here to play around with it. You put it on the right if you want to. So that's your label style. Then the last one here is the general settings and form. And so again, I've turned a few things on here in the actual template. Allow form submissions. Obviously, we want to be able to receive information. But if you ever need, for some reason, to just quickly turn a form off so it can no longer receive submissions, then you can turn that on. Spam protection I have turned on. You'll see there's a little information there and you can learn more in the help center. Again, I generally always have that turned on. I see no reason to have it turned off. This one here, I would leave at right in the middle at 3 seconds. I won't go into detail as to what one's all about, but it ties into the spam submission. Honeypot, again, probably slightly more advanced function, and auto-click protection for blind forms. So again, I have that one turned on. Now, this here is important. So the HTML name for any form you create must be unique. Well, I'm sure you've seen them. You get a form submission. If you set up a notification email using the processing steps, you can receive an Eloqua generated, it's a very internal type of communication that comes to you that tells you that the form has been submitted. So if you don't change this information here, then that means that that's what you'll see in that form submission email that comes through. Now, it's fine. It's unique, and you can copy it, and you can come into Eloqua and paste it, and you can find it. That's no drama. But it's not very helpful to people who are not having access to Eloqua. So what I generally always do is take the name of my form, whatever I put my name up here, and I put that name in here. The only thing is you need to be sensitive to the fact that it is HTML, so there can't be any spaces. So usually, dashes in between, like they've got their untitled form -1709. So just think that one through. So I just find that it's just how I do it now. It's kind of, I don't even think about it, but it just makes that email notification a little bit more sensible for people. All right, now the validation failure page is something that you can use. You don't have to, you can use it. And what that does, if they submit information that doesn't conform to the rules that you've applied, then you can send them off to this validation page and tell them that that's the case and encourage them to use their browser back button to go back and reattempt the form submission. It's not something I use a ton, but I certainly have had clients that prefer to use that particular piece of functionality. Now, all of the different options that you've got down here, for instance, let's take radio buttons. I'm going to drop that in. So a radio button is a pick list, essentially. So you go off to your pick list. Let's see if I'll choose that one just for fun. So, and then it just applies it here in the background. Now you'll notice that with the radio buttons, you can make them a required option, but they don't have to be. So it's completely up to you as to how you function with that one. The other one is checkboxes. So if I do checkboxes, and again, what I can do is apply a pick list to that. And so again, you can see that. So you'll notice too, because it's a pick list being associated with radio buttons or checkboxes, you don't really want to have things like please select in your naming convention with your pick list values, just something to be mindful of. Then you've got a multiple pick list. So same concept, we just go off to select a list, and let me choose something else. Content marketing preferences, okay. There we go. And so you can see how that one functions. So with that one, people can use their keyboard or their mouse, keyboard, or if they're on a smartphone. It works on a smartphone, but I would generally be more inclined to present something like a radio button or checkboxes to people on a smartphone if you know it's going to have a lot of mobile use. I just find, generally speaking, multiple pick lists on a smartphone a bit clumsy. So just something to think about, but it's all just about the CX, essentially. So that's the front end of your form, or the design portion of your form that you will play with. Are there any questions on any of those aspects of the form? If not, let's jump ahead. All right, so what happens next? Where is the form being used? Is that form being used as a standalone asset? As in, are you taking that form and dropping it on an Eloqua landing page? Is that it? There are a few different things that you can do. Another way to do it, and this is a fairly popular use case for Eloqua Forms, is to also have it on your CMS or your website. And in that case, it's one form on your CMS, and it's a single corresponding form sitting in Eloqua. The most common example, and we find this with sort of new clients when we sort of go through a configuration and setup stage, they're like the contact us form. We really need the contact us form submissions to go into Eloqua so that we can send them a nice email saying, thank you for being in contact with us. We'll be in contact with you shortly. The last one, though, or the third option, is on your CMS in a one-to-many scenario. So this is, and I certainly can't show you how to do this today, but just make you aware that it's a possibility, is to essentially have multiple forms. You may have your contact us form on multiple pages around the website. And so you don't need to create a single form in Eloqua for every single one of those. If it's the same contact us form on every single page, then we can have all of those forms from the CMS coming directly into a single form within Eloqua. Now, Eloqua can be smart enough to know which page they were on when they submitted that specific contact us form. So that may require, or you may like to be able to alter, for instance, the experience that they get in an email, the autoresponder, based on the page they're on. Think about whether it's a product pages. You might have a whole different range of product pages with a contact us form on it. If you're a university, for instance, right across the different faculties, you may have a contact us form on every single faculty page. But it'd be great to know that when Johnny or Mary submitted the form, they were on the engineering pages versus the business pages or versus the medicine pages, those sorts of things. Pretty simple to do, just requires a little bit of setup and you're ready to go. Okay, so what I wanted to do here was show you how Eloqua can help you present forms in a range of ways. And you may or may not have noticed in your registration for the user group this year, we've started to use the Lightbox. And this is really just kind of to showcase for you more than anything else, a different way to present information or to present that form experience to people. So this one is pretty easy to do. The only tip I would give you around using the Lightbox pop-up, it does work nicely on mobile. It's fine on mobile, but maybe just not making it too long. If you've got a long form that has a very specific purpose, I'd probably be more inclined to stick with a form on a landing page. Okay, so let's look at some practical use cases for different campaigns. Use cases for your forms. Okay, my experience, and this is not a definitive list, but my experience generally is that forms can probably be grouped into 3 different types. First of all, I would call them general forms. And so these are your inquiry, it's contact us, it's feedback, maybe it's service requests, or maybe application forms of some sort. I'd kind of put those in a general type of bucket. Then we might have more marketing-oriented forms, which could be lead capture style forms, but it could be a competition you're presenting. So the form needs to do certain things. A promotion of some sort, course outlines if we're a university or an educational body. Is it white papers or thought leadership, prospectus, maybe if we're in any type of business, but I was thinking real estate there. NPS is another big use for forms within Eloqua, and generally surveys as well. A calculator is kind of a fun way. Did you think of a form as being a calculator? That's another thing that a form can do. A form can be pretty smart in relation to what it does and how it functions. And so think about, you've probably done calculators a million times yourself. If you're looking to buy a property, you'll put in certain information into a form and then you press calculate and it tells you, okay, well, you can borrow X amount of dollars based on the information that you've given us. We did one years ago for a client where it was in finance, and their channel partners, sort of the retailers of the product, were able to enter information into a calculator based on their sales and what they'd done. And then the calculator would let them know what their rebate would be. Things like that. So there's all sorts of applications for forms, and don't just think of forms as first name, last name, email address type of scenario. Social lead generation campaigns. So many of you on the call will have worked with LinkedIn and Facebook lead gen forms, two really great tools that we would use. Then I thought the other third bucket is kind of registration of all sorts of types of registration, in-person events, webinars, conferences, roadshows. Maybe it's an annual ball that you run as an organization, internal staff events, all these sorts of things. And so this is where, if you're starting to think about templates and creating form templates, that you can probably come up with similar lists that would work well for you. Okay, so the most common use case for the form is that first one we mentioned, option A, which is where you can create basically a landing page. You pop your form onto the landing page. We can apply some styling and stuff to that as well. And there's no reason why your Eloqua form on your Eloqua landing page can't look exactly the same as your website or your CMS. It's just CSS and a bit of HTML, and Eloqua can replicate that quite easily. So there's no difference between the two. Option B. This one goes into a little bit more detail, and this is the one I was talking about in relation to the Contact Us form. And we call this reposting. And so reposting essentially is taking a form that's sitting on your CMS and it's built in the CMS. You probably have a form construct within the CMS that enables you to build forms. Fantastic. What we do then over in Eloqua is we replicate that particular form using the form design editor. So same fields, etc. You will probably add a few hidden fields, and we can talk about that at another episode of the user group. And then the main reason people want to do this is because, first of all, they don't want to interrupt the look and feel of the website. Understandable, that's fine. There's no reason you need to do that. And then the second one is because they want to take advantage of the processing steps that Eloqua gives them. So remember, there are so many things you can do. So people fill in the Contact Us form. We can then bring them into Eloqua, we can process them within Eloqua, and then based on different rules that you may have in place, we can push them straight through to the CRM platform. They can either go in as a lead, potentially, or maybe you have a service request or case management construct. So if you do, within the CRM, we can use the integration to push that form submission directly into some sort of a service queue where people can pick it up and play with it and respond to it more than play with it. So again, it's those processing steps that are really quite so powerful versus the alternative is usually most CMSs don't contain this level of functionality, or they have a really basic sort of email confirmation that may even be a plain text email, which is a bit drab. So we want to bring them into Eloqua so that you can then have a very on-brand experience with your autoresponders when you're sending them out to people. And then option C. So more advanced forms across multiple locations and integrated with your Eloqua campaign. So we won't have time to go into this one today. This is certainly a more advanced function, but I just want to let you know what's available and what's possible. So on the left there, you can see I've got multiple websites. So they're not pages within a single website, but they're multiple websites. Now, this won't be relevant for all of you, but some of you will in fact have many websites. If you're a brand that's spread across the country and you might have retail outlets or in some cases in real estate, so think about different developments that are happening. So one real estate organization may in fact have, potentially hundreds of websites, and each website is very much about a specific community, or it could be about a single high-rise development, for example, and they all have their own website. So they all have contact us forms, inquiry forms, all those sorts of things on them, and really they don't need to be any different. We're asking the same questions across all of them. So in fact, they can all flow into Eloqua into a single form, and if I was to say one form to rule them all, you might kind of get the graphic there, but anyway. Then another example that maybe is a little bit closer to home for most of you would be potentially looking at that same concept that I mentioned earlier about a contact us form that's on your website, but it's the same form across many pages. So again, we don't need to create many forms in Eloqua to receive that information. We can actually just create a single form. FYI on that one, just again, in context of today's webinar, I really just want you to be aware that that's a function and that's available. Okay, I was trying to think of a really fun way to say this, but really it comes down to that your forms are really fun or excessively interesting, but they're an incredibly powerful part of the process, and they're that touch point where when people reach your website or a promotional page or a campaign specific page with a form, we want to do everything we can to ensure that it's as simple and easy for people to complete. We don't want to make it complex because if we make it too complex, then they'll potentially just abandon the form. Now, once you start getting into some HTML world, and we can cover this in another user group, there are some really fun and cool ways that you can present forms. It doesn't have to just simply be a form on a page. The pop-up is kind of nice. It just gives you more real estate on your landing page, and the pop-up that draws their person's attention directly to the form at that point. So that can be really quite cool. But there's so much more that can be done in relation to your forms. So the nice thing you've got with Eloqua, of course, is the ability to drag and drop and build out those forms. And you can, even once the form is loaded onto the page, yes, it's live, but you can still make changes and updates, etc., should you need to. So that's something to be aware of. I probably should have put that under you should know. The final thing that I wanted to try and drive home today is around your data strategy, because your data strategy really will inform so much of what you do from a form building point of view. So demographic data is probably the big one, and most demographic data that you capture would be captured and stored on the Eloqua contact. Some of it may go off to a custom object, but most of it potentially could sit on the contact, where you can do so much with it from a segmentation point of view and field merges to repeat information back to people. You can use it in the segments for future campaigns to target people based on the information that they've shared with you. And this will differ. I mean, some of you are probably looking at some of these values thinking, oh my gosh, I would never ask those things. And others of you are like, well, we have to ask those things. Okay, so it really does differ for everybody. The contact is the main place where you would typically want to store your demographic data. The next one is kind of the psychographic questions that you may ask. And these are the more touchy-feely type of questions, I suppose, right? People's values and beliefs, their attitudes and opinions, maybe lifestyle habits, all depends on kind of what you're asking and what you're trying to capture. So then you need to make a decision. Okay, so we're going to ask people, how important is environmental sustainability to you? Okay, so that's great. We're going to get an answer, and the answer might be in a 5 pick list value of super important through to I don't even know what that means, through to I'm indifferent, whatever they may be. Okay, so it's good to get that information, and I'm sure you're asking it because it's campaign specific and so on and so forth. But what do we do with that data? Is it really relevant for us to add it to the contact? Because remember, you're limited by, I can't remember now, it's been a while, 250 system fields, I think it is, and then a couple of hundred custom fields that you can add. That sounds like a lot, but they can disappear pretty quickly across a large team deciding, oh, I'll just create a contact field. Custom objects is obviously a good place to put that. Or in some cases, as I said earlier, the information and the response could just live in the form. You don't need it to go anywhere else. You just need it in the form, and perhaps you're going to use it at an event. Something like that. Let your data strategy guide you in relation to what you're going to do. And generally speaking, the goal of most form submissions, I was going to say set events aside, but even still with events, is to get to a marketing qualified lead. So what are the questions that the sales team, service team, whoever it is, what do they really need to know in order for them to be able to pick up and run with an individual who could be presented to them as a marketing qualified lead? So let's make sure we understand that. And again, this is where templates come in really helpful. You could have a core lead gen style form that, using progressive profiling, you've got all of those key questions in there that you want to ask. And that's the form you're going to use each time you create a download for a white paper, or maybe you also use it for an event, etc. And it's just that ability to slowly present the key questions and to gather those responses over time. Let's jump ahead. I can see there's no questions. So I'm not sure if that means I'm answering all of your questions or if there's just no questions. All right, let's do a quick recap for you on 24A. We do have a subscription, funnily enough, called Eloqua Important Updates. If you scan that QR code that's on your screen right now, you can fill in that form, and you'll receive updates once a quarter. Occasionally, there's something else that we think is important that we might get out to you, but generally it's once a quarter. So you certainly won't be flooded with emails on that one. First one, Redwood. So the Redwood experience continues to roll out across the platform, which is great news. The Zoom app for Eloqua is now generally available. So this is the Oracle Zoom app. So the team at Oracle Labs have built a connector or an app taking information between Eloqua and Zoom. The big thing that's new with this one, which is really good, is in the past, the app has only serviced the Zoom webinar function. You can now also bring in Zoom meeting information. So if you're wanting to run a Zoom meeting versus a webinar, that's fine. You can now bring that information in and use Eloqua to help you automate that process as well. For those with the generative AI enhancement, which is an add-on, the AI add-on for Eloqua subject line recommender for email editor, it's currently limited controlled availability, but there's more to come. So if that's something that your organization has running, then there's, jump in, see if you can get it. You might need to apply. I'm sure you will. You'll find information in the help center as well on that one. Security headers, so permissions policy headers and refer policy header information has been added. The webhook project, which was, I think, in controlled availability, has now been opened up. So everybody, it's now available for all customers with 24A. So if you're familiar with webhooks and what that means and how they work, then that's fantastic. If you're not and would like some information, just email support@marketingcube.com.au and we can help you understand a bit more about that one. There are a bunch of other apps too, APIs, SMS add-on, that's the Oracle Eloqua SMS add-on, and also the email bounce processor enhancements. Now, I've highlighted that one because Eloqua, the deliverability team are always working on this one, and essentially what they're looking at is just making sure that the information they're getting back from servers, so when they send out the emails and they get either out of office or hard bounce information, they're looking at categorizing that more effectively, and it's kind of a moving target, I suppose. It'll be interesting to see what changes you see in that. Now, that's been live for you since February, and what are we now? We're into March. So a little bit of hopefully some improvements there as well. All right, so Danny says, how do you access the Lightbox pop-up form? Sure, Danny. I'll use your question as my segue. So let's jump in to Q&A. So we're just on our 45 minutes, which is what we're trying to stick to this year. So I will stay here and I'm going to walk Danny through this particular piece. Please feel free to stay, but if you need to run, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next month. But let's have a look, Danny, and I'll show you how to do that. So the normal process is you would need to obviously build your form to do that. And so specifically, if I understand correctly, this is what you're asking about. So how do I do that, essentially? Good question. All right, so let me find page. Actually, I'm going to just grab a blank page, Danny. It's a bit quicker. Just those pages are live, so I didn't want to play with them. All right. Okay, so logic would say to you, maybe, well, is it here? Do I not go to forms and find it? Well, no, you don't. Because remember, what you're trying to do is you actually want to put a form behind a button. So we have to, first of all, drag the button in. Once we drag the button in, it's actually a hyperlink type. So you can see down here, there's one called Lightbox. So I select on Lightbox. I get that empty canvas drop into my screen. And over here, the design components have altered. So I can actually do a few things. I can drop in an image, a heading, but then, of course, my form as well. Now, this would look hideous. I'll encourage you to never do this. Now, choose a seasonal image. I'll take that one right there, just so you can see an image. And obviously, we put in some text. Like so, but of course the key one we want is form. So I'm just going to grab a standard form. There we go. And then you can also play around over here on the left with different backgrounds if you want to put different colors behind it, just as you've got the ability to play with padding. If you do utilize images, etc., you can play around with those, but that's essentially how you do it. And so then you just hit close, and that's where it sits now. So if you need to edit it at any point, now that you've actually assigned a lightbox to the button, you'll see the edit lightbox button appear over here on the left. So that's how you apply a pop-up form, or lightbox, I suppose, is the term that we should be using. Hopefully that answers your question, Danny. Anything else? Well, if that's answered that question, and let me just confirm there are no other questions. All right, everybody, thank you so much for making some time to be with us. We will be visiting forms again in a few months, but kind of taking it up a step. And what we want to do is show you a few other things that forms can do, probably a little bit around that NPS, also looking at how you can present forms on a landing page in quite a different way that will require a little bit of coding, but can provide a very different experience. So if the form is of high value and that's kind of something you want to play with, obviously you can talk to us today about that, or I look forward to seeing you in a couple of months. But next month, we're going to be looking at lead nurture campaigns. That was the other key thing that people asked for last month when we asked them for their preferred topics moving forward this year. So next month is all about lead generation. So I look forward to seeing you then. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next month.